So we begin our journey through the Harry Potter video games with the game that started it all, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This game was released just a few days before the feature film back in November of 2001, and the game saw release on the PC, the Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Advance. But for the purposes of this review, we're just going to focus in on the PlayStation version. The game would later be remade for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube in 2003, and this version was modeled after the sequel, Chamber of Secrets, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next review. Overall, this is a mediocre start for the Harry Potter video game series, but hey, we all have to start somewhere. So first, let's talk about how the story was adapted for the game. Most of the important beats of the narrative are told through narrated sections using illustrated still images. The opening narration gives the backstory of Harry's life with the Dursleys and how he received his acceptance letter to Hogwarts. Yet, there's no mention of a certain character who's central to all this backstory, Voldemort. In fact, Voldemort receives no mention by name until the end of the game, when you escape from him in the Forbidden Forest. Voldemort is, kind of important in that he's the antagonist of the entire series. He's the reason why Harry is orphaned and lives with the Dursleys, and yet there's no mention of him. It becomes clearer as you progress through this game that the story literally required you... It becomes clear as you progress through the story that this game required you to have either seen the film or read the book. Though this game could have tried appealing to a more general audience, it's not that far out of the question since this is the first entry in the series. Instead, general audiences will be left more confused by the lack of significant plot details. We're a mere few seconds in, and crucial information is already left out. And this is really just the beginning. Almost every game in this series throws out more important plot details and characters than the films left out. In some cases it's slight, and in other cases it becomes painful to see how things have been rewritten to fit what's been left in. I understand that the films have a 2-hour time constraint in order to fit all these important plot details, but this is a game and there really is no constraint on how long that needs to be. Granted, movie-based games tend to have shorter development cycles, so there is a little less time to work on it, but still, when you have the time and effort to create new plot lines to bulk out your narrative, you should be able to fit the actual plot lines that came from the film. For example, early in the game, Malfoy kidnaps Hedwig and you have to go through the opening tutorial to rescue her. It's a plotline that's not from the book or the film, yet here it is. I mean, you could argue that this plot was just created to house the tutorial for the game, but why not put the tutorial during the scene when Harry goes to Diagon Alley at the start of the film? Oh, but you can't do that since the game skips that part, covering it in the opening narration when you start the game. I mean, why not have the scene at Diagon Alley? It's a great time to get the player used to how to cast spells and how to move around the environment. I mean, you do go to Diagon Alley at the end of the game for another plotline that the game made up. Why not have bold scenes? It would definitely bulk up the narrative a bit. And the game is short, clocking in at a little over 3 hours. And the length of these games is just another trend we're going to see with this series, with most titles being completed within a few hours at most. But enough of the story. After all, good gameplay can make you forgive the story if the game is engaging to play. This game is classified as an action-adventure platformer, though it's probably more heavy on the platforming than the action. Harry has an auto-jump similar to Link from the Legend of Zelda series, so there really is no controlling your jump directly. Though there are ways to shorten your jump by slightly pulling back on the analog stick, though for the most part, the jumping controls are pretty solid. You are also allowed one spell to use at your discretion through the entire game, and that spell is Flipendo. You cannot use any of the other spells at will. The rest are context sensitive, so you need to find specific things in the environment to be able to cast those spells. Throughout the game, you're going to collect the spells Wingardium Leviosa, which levitates objects, Incendio, which can burn or stun plants, although it mostly just tends to burn things, Avifors, which can transform eagle statues into birds, and finally Verdimillious, which can cast a bright light to reveal hidden platforms. Whenever you come across one of these context-sensitive spells, you have to perform a little button minigame before actually casting the spell. For example, when you come across a spell like Wingardium Leviosa, you'll get to control the object you're levitating and drop it with triangle. Cast Incendio, 2 circles with symbols from the PlayStation controller will revolve around a larger circle, and a ring will also circle around, with the goal being to press the correct symbol when the circle and ring match up. Casting Avifors has you pressing the X button when it reaches a marker at the top of a circle, and with Verdimillious you do nothing aside from pressing the button to activate the spell. It's a bit disconnecting that you have to perform each spell differently. Not only that, but you have a limited amount of time to use the context spells. It seems strange to have to do any sort of button-pressing minigame to perform a spell. I don't have to press any buttons to cast Flipendo, so why should I have to do that for the other spells? Why not cast all spells like Flipendo? That would have been a fine system. I mean, the later games do this, so I really don't understand the purpose of these button minigames to cast some of the spells. Now, while performing the spells might seem a bit mundane, learning how to perform them is even more mundane than it ought to be. You have to play this mini-game where a tiny dot flies around to the 4 buttons on the PlayStation controller, and you have to press the correct button when the dot reaches the symbol. If you miss one symbol, you have to do the sequence over again, and there's usually 3 to 4 patterns you have to perform, and you have to do each pattern 3 times each. And I really don't get this, since you don't use the patterns when casting spells. So what's the point of playing the follow the pointer minigame if the pattern serves no purpose in the actual spell casting? The system used on the PC version actually made a bit more sense. There, lessons had you drawing a symbol with your mouse for each spell in the game, and then that symbol would appear on objects in the environment that you could use that spell with. So at least that system was connected in some way. Spells in the PlayStation version are represented by red and blue twinkling lights in order to distinguish between them. But even after you've distinguished which spell to use, you still have to press the buttons to cast the spell, and it has nothing to do with the pattern that you learned in the classroom. So why not just go into a classroom and the teacher can say something like, objects that twinkle red, that's Abathors, and that's it. You can now use the spell on anything that twinkles red. I just don't understand why they had to, make this so complicated. It could have been a really simple system to use. Adding insult to injury is how often you'll end up using some of these spells. I mean, Flipendo is pretty much used for everything. Killing creatures, Flipendo. Want to move a block, Flipendo. Get rid of a spiderweb, Flipendo. Everything is Flipendoed. But you will use Wingardium Leviosa sparingly to lift up a few objects here and there, but nothing majorly important. Incendio is mostly used during the Forbidden Forest sections to burn plants. It's Abathors and Verdimillious that really got screwed over. You basically use these spells once or twice in the entire game. It feels like there's no point in learning them since you barely use them. You'd assume that by the end of the game there would be some sort of a challenge area to use all of the spells that you've amassed in the game. But no, you just keep using Flipendo. You pretty much kill everything. I mean, hell, screw Stupefy. Harry should have been using Flipendo against Death Eaters in his later years. The final issue with the gameplay is that the game seems to have a fascination with time limits. Most things the game asks you to do usually have a timer attached to them. You want to go to the flying class to fly your broom through rings? It's timed. You want to get to class? It's timed. Cast a spell? Timed. Collect objects? Timed. Just slow down already. Game's short enough as it is without you rushing me through everything. And rather than just show how much time is left in these activities by using numbers, the game has a blue bar that empties at the bottom of the screen the less time you have. Accompanying the bar is the most ear-piercing tick-tock noise that increases in frequency the less time you have. It's enough to drive you up a wall, and it can sometimes break any concentration you had. Aside from the main story, there are a few side diversions to keep you busy. You can collect beans for Fred and George Weasley in exchange for passwords to open up portraits around Hogwarts. And these portraits are usually right near Fred and George, so they're not that hard to find. There are 4 different color beans to collect in the game: yellow, blue, green, and red, and each one nets you a different reward for collecting the requested amount. This is made a little easier since the game is nice enough to have more beans of each color than what Fred and George requested, so you won't get screwed over by missing a bean here or there. Though this side quest is not really worth the effort since the rewards are pretty pathetic.
Keep in mind, not all secrets are rewarding.
The yellow beans give you access to the Nimbus 2000, which is an interesting reward to say the least, considering in the film Hedwig gives Harry the Nimbus when he becomes a Seeker. I mean, Hedwig did give me a broom earlier in the game, but what, that was just some random broom? I mean, I remember playing this as a kid, and I got really excited at this part because I thought that this was the Nimbus 2000. I know that the broom that Hedwig does give you doesn't quite look like the model from the film, but I just figured that was the graphics. How was I supposed to know it was hidden away somewhere? Better question, why is it hidden away? Did Fred and George steal it from Professor McGonagall before she could give it to Harry? This is like if one of the bean rewards was the invisibility cloak. I mean, Harry got the broom as a gift. He didn't find it in some random chamber. The Nimbus is something that you should have got as part of the story. Collecting the blue beans gives you a famous Witch and Wizards cards, which is kind of a waste since these cards are already hidden in secret passages around Hogwarts, and all you really can do is look at them in a scrapbook back in the Gryffindor common room. So they serve no purpose other than just to tell you information on the witches and wizards. But get this, if you actually finish the game with all of the cards that you can collect around Hogwarts, you'll get a bonus ending where Ron can give Harry his own wizard card, and you'll get to play an extra Quidditch match against Slytherin. So I guess that's something. I mean, I understand Harry getting his own wizard card as the result of collecting all of the other cards in the game, but the Quidditch match seems like something that should have been a part of the game to begin with, and that sort of readdresses my issue earlier about the game being too short. The reward for all of the green beans is Quidditch armor, which is completely useless as you'll rarely ever get hit with bludgers, and if you do, they don't take that much damage off. The armor doesn't really give you much of an edge in any of the matches, so again, pretty useless. And the final reward for collecting all of the red beans is an upgrade to the Flipendo spell, which turns it red and can allow for faster charge times. It sounds like the best reward out of the bunch, but there's a small catch. By the time you've collected all of the red beans, it should be right after the troll chase to the girls' bathroom, and you think that right after this finishes, you could just go and talk to Fred and George. In fact, they're standing like 2 feet away from you once you finish the chase. But instead, the minute you do get out of the chase scene, you'll get dragged into a Quidditch match with Ravenclaw, and then you'll be dragged to Diagon Alley to go to Gringotts to get money to find supplies to help Hagrid heal Norbert. And then you're going to return to Hogwarts only to get more story narration, which explains how Harry, Ron, and Hermione are trying to give Norbert to Ron's brother Charlie, and then you have to serve detention in the Forbidden Forest. So by the time all of that gets done, you're at the end of the game, and the only thing left to do are the challenges protecting the Sorcerer's Stone. So you can really only use this upgrade spell in the last few rooms. And there's really not that many enemies in these rooms, so you'll probably just be using it in the final battle against Voldemort. Now, while all this might seem like a sea of disappointment and mediocrity, there are a few bright spots. The presentation is a good combination of areas replicated from the film and newly created areas just for the game. Most of the new areas feel like they would fit in with the areas from the film, so there's not a giant creative difference when moving from one set of areas to the other. Quidditch matches can be fun for a bit, even if they're simple in their structure. Also, the game has all of the challenges that protect the Sorcerer's Stone, even the ones that were cut from the film, like the Troll Room and the Potion Chamber, showing that the developers did try to go the extra mile to include some stuff that got cut from the films. And the score, for what little there is, performed by Jeremy Soule, fits the atmosphere of the game well. Although for most of the game you'll probably be wishing there was more of it, since most of the game is played in utter silence. Overall, this is a pretty average start, like I said, for the Harry Potter series. It's not the worst movie-based game ever, and as we'll see by the end of the series of reviews, this is not the worst Potter game in the series. The best way to appreciate Sorcerer's Stone is to see how the later games managed to improve upon the elements that originated from this, which we'll do in our next review when we look at Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Thanks for watching.